Hello and welcome to the arcade. You know, when a system as revered as the NES gets talked about, it's really hard not to think of the great games like Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, Mega Man, and Final Fantasy. These are all timeless classics that not only went on to inspire future generations of developers, but all continued on as successful franchises themselves, even to this day, decades later. There is no shortage of classics on the NES. And in fact, the NES is where so many of the greatest franchises of all time got their first entry. All those games are so easy to praise, and deservedly so. But there are a lot of other games that deserve some attention too. The NES may not have that many underrated gems left to find after all these years, but there are still a few that I think deserve more attention than they've been getting. So today I'd like to tell you about 3 of the most underrated NES games that I love and hopefully convince you to give them a try. So here we go! These are what I consider the best of the most underrated games on the NES.
Number 1. Wizards and Warriors. Wizards and Warriors was developed by Rare and released in 1987. The game is an action platformer focusing on exploring each level to find the 3 keys needed to unlock the door to the boss arena. Once you defeat the boss and save the princess, you move on to the next area of the map where you repeat this process until the end. Each area or level ramps up the challenge but also provides interesting new mechanics and power-ups to find. Like in one level where you float on the bubbles that come up from the lava to get to the higher platforms, and this one power-up where you can freeze enemies in place. The game feels kind of floaty compared to other platformers, with a jump that is high and slow, and you can even move around and manipulate your direction while in the air. The combat is basic but serviceable, with the power-ups adding just enough complexity to keep it interesting. I like the fact that your character's sword becomes a hurt box while jumping. I think the whole front side of the player does actually, because I don't know any other way I would have been able to beat the boss from level 2. The reasons that contribute to this game being underrated are all probably warranted. The game has some clunkiness to it. Sometimes the platforming can feel inconsistent, and the perspective and camera can sometimes cause confusing moments while trying to navigate the environments, where you can easily miss a very small foothold or even slide off of some of the slanted ledges. And another thing, while most of the music is good, some of it can be downright aggravating at times. Like when you're at low health and the same couple of notes just keeps bleeping at you over and over, it can make things really stressful. Some people might enjoy that as a type of immersion, letting you know via audio cue that you're low on life, but for me it got pretty annoying. There are some absolutely awesome tunes in here though, which is no surprise because the game's soundtrack was composed by David Wise, who did the Donkey Kong Country games. At its core, Wizards and Warriors has got a really solid base of running, jumping, and fighting. Exploring the levels and collecting and using different power-ups is fun, and almost all of the bosses are challenging and interesting. Especially the final boss, which has a rather large boss arena that you have to navigate while fighting him. Another cool thing about this game is that it has unlimited continues, so you can't really lose any progress unless you shut the game off. It makes for a game that most people should be able to beat in just a couple of hours, or less if you know where all the keys are, which is rare for this type of game on the NES. The game would definitely be extremely difficult if it didn't have unlimited continues though. But thankfully, the way they coded it is, if you use a continue, you literally start right back in the exact place you died. No progress deleted. The game also has a few small references to The Lord of the Rings, which I thought was neat. Wizards and Warriors is really cool, and I hope you check it out if you get the chance. Number 2. The 3D Battles of World Runner. 3D World Runner was developed by Square and released in 1987. And they even had the legendary Nobuo Uematsu compose the soundtrack. What else could you ask for? Maybe a pair of 3D glasses, actually. Because this is one of the few NES games that came with and utilized 3D glasses for a cool effect while running through these virtual worlds. All you have to do is press select on your controller and bam, it's in 3D. I don't have any 3D glasses on me at the time of recording this, but I'll probably get some soon just so I can see if this really works or not. Anyways, this game is pretty unique because it's a 3D game on the NES. Well, it's not really 3D, but it tries to make you feel like it is. You play as the World Runner, Jack, and it's a platformer/rail shooter where you run forwards while your perspective is from behind the main character. You're always running forward, although you can increase or decrease your speed, and you can jump and move left and right. The presentation took a little time to get used to, but once I did, I started to have a lot of fun with this game. There's 8 worlds, and each world has 4 levels, with a boss fight at the end of each world. The main gameplay consists of running forward, moving side to side and jumping over gaps and enemies, shooting enemies with power-ups, collecting special items, and then eventually defeating the boss at the end of each world. During the boss fights, you stop scrolling forward, but you then have the freedom to fly around the entirety of the screen in any direction to avoid the boss or its projectiles. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this game is underrated. First of all, while it is cool, it's just a weird perspective to have for an NES game. The NES wasn't really capable of true 3D graphics, so when a game looks like this, there's always going to be limitations. Nothing in the game looks awful necessarily, it's just that the technology wasn't quite there yet to achieve a truly convincing 3D perspective. I also think that 3D World Runner fell under the radar due to other high-profile releases from Square in 1987. Rad Racer is one, and the big bad Final Fantasy. But I think that if you want to try something new, something unique that isn't typically offered by the NES or even the 16-bit generation that often, you should give 3D World Runner a try. It's pretty challenging, and some of the jumps in the game can be annoying and unforgiving, but it's nothing if not interesting. And overall, it is very fun. Number 3. Shatterhand. Shatterhand was developed by Natsume and released in 1991, pretty late in the NES lifespan. It's an action game in a similar vein to Contra or Ninja Gaiden, even sharing some of the same mechanics. The gameplay is exceptionally smooth, with great physics, awesome animations, good level design, and fun mechanics to play around with. And the player character's main weapon is just his fists. How cool is that? At the start of the game, you get to watch a really well done cinematic for an NES game, then you get dropped into the intro or tutorial stage. This stage is deceptively easy compared to what the rest of the game has in store, but it does a great job of showing off everything that the game has to offer. The beautiful graphics and animations are on full display here, with few enough enemies that you can really appreciate the detail that went into crafting the look and feel of the characters and the world they inhabit. And the goal of the game is pretty simple. Run, jump, and fight your way from the left side of the screen to the right, finding the end of the stage, beating the boss, and then selecting a new level to play. You don't necessarily have to play any of the levels in a specific order other than playing the intro stage first, so you can then jump around according to your personal preference after you reach that stage select screen. One of the coolest things in Shatterhand is the buddy robot that you can get that helps you fight the many enemies you'll encounter. You have to find 3 pieces to put together the robot, and they're usually hidden in boxes or in some special area around each level. And once you find them, and depending on which exact pieces you find, they'll go together and they'll form a robot buddy that can either punch, shoot, or do other helpful stuff. And he stays right with you, just kinda hovering, floating behind you, and attacking whatever you attack. But the absolute coolest thing about Shatterhand is definitely the boss fights. Some of them are pretty easy, easier than the stages that came before them actually, but almost all the bosses have a varied moveset, really cool design, and they all fit really well in as not only a theme with their level, but as a cool contrast to the main character. The game does such a good job of balancing a lot of different things, and while I know there are reasons why this game never got as popular as other action games, I just feel like it really missed the limelight that it deserved. Each one of these games, while they have their flaws, certainly deserved way more attention than they initially received. Wizards and Warriors provides that classic action platforming with an old-school fantasy theme, great level and world design, and lots of little quirks and humor. 3D World Runner provides a unique experience from most of what you get on the NES library and provides an addicting challenge to come back to over and over. And Shatterhand just blew me away. From the detail of the graphics, the fluid animations, great boss design, and satisfying action gameplay, I'm shocked that this game isn't one in the pantheon of greatest NES games of all time. For me, it is, but for the time that it released, it really did not make as big of an impact as it should have. Now, if you're looking to try any or all of these games, which I definitely recommend, here's how to find them. First, check your local game store for Wizards and World Runner. I found both at a shop in my hometown, and they were both $10. They go for about the same price on eBay as well. Wizards and Warriors goes for between $6 and $10, and 3D World Runner around $10 or $12. Unfortunately, Shatterhand tends to go for around $80. I'll admit that I don't really recommend dropping that kind of cash just to get your hands on a physical cartridge of this one, unless you are in a great financial situation to do so. Rather, I would say browse, the web, and maybe install RetroArch, and, well, you know what I mean. And I actually discovered Shatterhand on a handheld that I got from AliExpress. It was the last one in the NES emulator that came installed on this thing, and I probably never would have heard of the game otherwise.
And that's my list. These 3 games for me are some of the best and most underrated games out there, despite how many amazing titles the NES library has, and how meticulously that library has been analyzed over the decades. But it's never too late to discover a hidden gem for a console as classic and iconic as the NES. And with the first 2 games totaling for under $20 for both, it's easy to recommend them as a nice, cheap, and most importantly fun couple of pickups to add to your NES library. And who knows, maybe you can find a better deal on Shatterhand than the rest of us. And with all that said, I would love to hear from you. Tell me, what are your picks for the most underrated NES games, and tell me what you thought of my 3 picks. Can't wait to hear from you, and thank you so much for watching.